As if this were a world where the voice of each country would count equally, power, money, and military force still decide who they listen to and whom they talk down to. But South Africa rebels. Right before the summit, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt literally shocked many when she announced at a news conference that the U.S. would not be joining official G20 talks. Even more incendiary, she charged President Cyril Ramaphosa with running his mouth on fake claims. Yes, those were her words. That's how an African president is being spoken to on the global stage in 2025. What was the reason for this? In an South Africa press event, President Ramaphosa elaborated that the U.S. had given notice of reconsideration of their participation at the summit. He said discussions were still going on, that these were last minute, and that South Africa took this as a good sign, as no boycott ever solved anything. He added that being inside the tent is always better than being outside, and that the U.S., being the world's largest economy, needs to be in it. But Washington pushed back hard. They denied the remarks by Ramaphosa and attacked South Africa for making the guest list of the summit too long, something they labeled the G100, implying that greater inclusiveness somehow diminishes the G20. But none of this deterred Ramaphosa from pushing his vision of a more inclusive gathering. Before the summit, he gave an impassioned speech. He greeted the world in the languages of South Africa and underscored the Zulu word Sanbonani, which means we see you, recognizing dignity and humanity in all that stand before them. He spoke to the principle of Ubuntu, I am because we are, pressing that the world moves further when nations move together. He embraced the criticism that this summit looks like a G100 or even a G1,000,000 to him. Bringing more voices to the table is exactly the point. Inclusion is the purpose. Then Ramaphosa tied this moment to two events from 1955, the Conference of Bandung, Indonesia, where newly independent countries of Asia and Africa stood up to the world and spoke for themselves, and the Congress of the People in Kliptown, Johannesburg, during apartheid, when oppressed South Africans came together to define justice and equality for themselves. Both movements symbolized the rise of voices clamoring for dignity, unity, and independence. And today, all over again, the global South is speaking for itself. The truth is that a small group enjoyed privilege, while the majority of South Africans were oppressed and excluded from almost every part of society. But on the Congress of the People, something historic occurred. People of every race, faith, and background came together to adopt the Freedom Charter, the document which was later to shape South Africa's democratic constitution. The Freedom Charter proudly declared that the nation must be guided by peace and friendship. The people must govern, and all national groups must have equal rights and equal opportunities. Today, history is repeating itself in a different way, and this will also be a year of remember. That marks a turning point for global cooperation. This is not only the first G20 summit on African soil. This social summit, who brings people together from across the world, is making history of their own. This is the first initiated by President Lula in Brazil and happening in Africa. Every participant here is part of that milestone. Meanwhile, it occurs in a period when the world has never been so uncertain. Growing political divides, poverty increases, intensified conflict, and climate change are threatening development everywhere. And huge gaps in wealth, unequal access to international finance, and development imbalances make it even harder to attain the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Africa, too, is pursuing its own long-term vision through the African Union's Agenda 2063 for the building of the Africa that its people want. This is only the second G20 social summit since this idea was launched in Brazil, and the number that has participated here is remarkable. I am told there were more than 100 meetings in which people shared ideas experiences, and worked together. It is this room right here where the foundation is laid for real global action on G20 priorities. And that matters because any global action is only credible when it reflects the voices of real people. The South African presidency of the G20 has been underpinned by the precept that the concerns of developing countries must be thrust to the fore. Problems of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment are not side issues. These are fundamental maladies. The South Africans have taken a lead from Brazil with its intense focus on these themes and have rammed them even higher up the agenda. During its presidency, South Africa has driven the reform of the global financial system for global governance to be more democratic, protecting the right to development, dignity, and equality of every nation. And no one should be left behind. Meanwhile, South Africa had called on the world's biggest economies to invest in sustainable development and protect the planet for the future of all people. They also congratulated Brazil for hosting COP30 and for President Lula's insistence on preserving the rainforest, something the whole world depends on. But here's the key point. For the decisions made at the G20 Leaders Summit to have legitimacy and real impact, they need strong roots. And those roots are the people, civil society groups, community organizations, women's groups, youth voices, academics, think tanks, business, labor movements, and grassroots organizations supporting marginalized communities, including LGBTQ groups, people with disabilities, and the unemployed. Real leadership must be grounded in real communities. Thankfully, this summit includes meaningful participation from all these groups. Women 20, Youth 20, Business 20, Civil 20, Labor 20, Parliament 20, Media 20, Disability 20, and many more. If I missed one, it's only because there are so many. But together, they are what make this summit stronger, in fact, than the Leaders Summit that begins soon. And honestly, your gathering here looks a lot more vibrant than the boardroom where the world leaders will meet. Throughout the summit, delegates discussed everything from digital inclusion and just economic transition to climate justice, financial reform, media freedom, democracy, and attaining the sustainable development goals. They stressed that resilient and inclusive supply chains should be built in order to shield vulnerable nations from trade instability. They also pointed out that an equitable transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient world economy is highly essential one that listens to those who are most affected. It means participants are now calling upon G20 leaders to step up and invest in global water systems, something that touches the life of every human. The Social Summit's objective has always been clear: to make global leadership commit to the protection of the most vulnerable populations of the world. And today is the perfect reminder of that mission. It's World Children's Day, the anniversary of the adoption of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the very first global convention ratified by South Africa after it became a democracy. Across Africa, the call coming out of this social summit is clear. More resources must go to ending child poverty, stopping hunger, and protecting every child's future. South Africa's own government has recognized that some communities are facing serious struggles with child hunger, and leadership has announced a major effort to address poverty and hunger among the country's most vulnerable families. This is going to be a key focus moving forward. Something powerful underlined the discussions at this summit, to a heightened political will for opening opportunities to the young. It called on governments to ensure that women and children get priority on health and well-being, and that women finally get equal representation in every part of life. The message was crystal clear. The era of pushing women to the sidelines is over. This century should be one for women leading fully, visibly, an unapologetic ally. South Africa has joined the Global Leaders Network for Women's children's and adolescents' health. Within that network, leaders are deeply concerned about declining international funding that supports health systems around the world. They have committed to working together to secure global health financing to ensure the most vulnerable communities do not get denied their right to proper care. In the words of Thomas Sankara, African revolutionary, there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. He even went further to say he never wants to live in a society where half of the population is forced into silence. Truth that still resonates. No society will move forward while rights of women and girls are made irrelevant. A sustainable, equitable society is one in which the work women do every day is recognized and compensated. But the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide plagues too many countries, forcing countless women into lives of misery and straining the social and economic fabric of entire nations. Violence against women has depressed economies, shattered communities, and sends development into a tailspin. Men and boys must be part of the solution. They must confront harmful norms, challenge old power structures, and support survivors instead of silencing them. In South Africa, gender-based violence is a national crisis, and women across the country have been begging for stronger action, better protection, and more support from government. For this reason, the South African government officially declared gender-based violence and femicide a crisis that calls for urgent and extraordinary measures. All sectors of society